Welcome to this quiet place. If you'd like to stay a little longer, you can follow along and simply let the next few minutes be unhurried, as if the night itself has paused to listen with you. And all you need to do is breathe softly and allow these old sentences to settle like warm sand at the bottom of clear water. When we're searching for justice, a thing far more precious than gold, let that line move through you slowly, like a thin ribbon of dawn across a dark sea, because it reminds us that justice is not a loud trophy carried through the streets. It is a subtle weight in the chest, a hidden balance that makes the inside of a person feel orderly. Even when the outside world feels busy and unfair, imagine an ancient Athenian courtyard at night, marble tiles cooling under the stars, and two friends leaning toward each other with lamplight between them, searching not for coins, but for something quieter and rarer, something that cannot be spent and cannot be stolen. And as you listen, you can treat justice as the gentle question your mind has been holding all day without words. What would it feel like to be aligned, to be whole, to be at rest, said more simply? And more softly, if you can find justice in yourself, you have found something more precious than anything you can hold in your. Let that line move through you slowly, like a thin ribbon of dawn across a dark sea, because it reminds us that justice is not a loud trophy carried through the streets. It is a subtle weight in the chest, a hidden balance that makes the inside of a person feel orderly, even when the outside world feels busy and unfair. Imagine an ancient Athenian courtyard at night, marble tiles cooling under the stars, and two friends leaning toward each other with lamplight between them, searching not for coins, but for something quieter and rare, something that cannot be spent and cannot be stolen. And as you listen, you can treat justice as the gentle question your mind has been holding all day without words. What would it feel like to be aligned, to be whole, to be at rest, said more simply. And more softly, if you can find justice in yourself, you have found something more precious than anything you can hold in your hand. Justice is the advantage of the stronger. Here is the blunt voice of the city when it is tired, the voice that has seen laws change and banners rise and fall, and has concluded that right is merely whatever power can enforce. Picture a stone tribunal beneath tall columns, the air warm with dust, and somewhere in the crowd, the quiet recognition that the strongest arm often writes the cleanest sentence. But in a sleepful reading, we do not argue with this claim in anger. We simply watch it as if watching a storm far out at sea, because Plato is letting us notice a frightening possibility that people can call something justice while meaning only permission granted by strength, permission to win. And when you notice that possibility without panic, you gain a kind of freedom, because you stop confusing the stamp on the scroll with the truth in the soul, repeated gently. Sometimes the world names strength justice, but your inner life does not have to agree. Each government frames laws for its own advantage. This is how the mask is made, not in one dramatic moment, but in small daily decisions, in language that sounds reasonable, in rules that feel official, in punishments that arrive with solemn faces. Imagine 3 different cities at sunrise. One ruled by a tyrant, one by a crowd, one by a few families. Each city hearing the same word, justice, yet each city meaning something slightly different, because each city is protecting its own shape. In the quiet of this room, you can feel how soothing it is to see the mechanism clearly. Power tends to call itself good, not because it is always evil, but because it is always hungry for stability. always tempted to label its own preference as universal law. And now, as your breathing slows, let your mind picture a sculptor smoothing wet clay, pressing a seal into it, and that seal is justice, and the clay is the law, and the hand is the ruling interest. Said again, in a simpler whisper, laws often mirror the hands that make them. But tell me, is he a money maker or a healer of the sick? This is one of Socrates' calmest knives. He does not shout. He just asks what a craft is truly for. And in that gentle question the room becomes quiet. Imagine a physician in a small whitewashed house, early morning light coming through linen, grinding herbs with slow patience. And notice how strange it would be if the physician forgot the patient and loved only the fee. Plato is guiding you toward a restful distinction. Every role has a natural aim, and when the role forgets its aim, the role becomes a costume. Leadership, like medicine, is supposed to serve what it leads, not feed upon it. And when it feeds upon it, it becomes a kind of illness that wears a crown. Repeat it in softer words, as if you are telling it to yourself. Ask what a thing is for, and you will see whether it is healthy. When there is an income tax, the just man will pay more and the unjust less. This sentence sounds like a weary laugh in the marketplace, the kind of laugh that comes from seeing how honesty can be punished by arithmetic. And yet, in a quiet listening, it becomes a lullaby about temptation. The unjust often seems to glide through loopholes like a fish through reeds, while the just walks openly on the shore and is seen by everyone. Picture a ledger on a wooden table, ink dark as night, numbers lined up like small soldiers, and a person choosing whether to hide or to reveal. Plato is letting us feel the heaviness of being decent in a world that rewards cleverness, and also the strange private lightness that comes from not needing to hide. Said gently again, injustice may save money, but it spends your inner peace. Tyranny is wholesale plunder, sacred and profane, private or public. Here Plato asks you to notice a scale. Small theft is named and punished, but large theft, when it conquers, can be dressed as glory. Imagine a city at night, doors bolted, oil lamps trembling in the wind, and above the rooftops a palace glowing calm and untouchable, while below the streets feel thinner, poorer, quieter. The word wholesale is the chilling part, because it suggests not a single crime but an entire rhythm of taking, a system that turns the many into fuel for the one. And yet even here, let your breath remain slow, because the point is not to frighten you, it is to teach you to see. When power grows unaccountable, it can devour without feeling hungry. Say it again, more softly. Tyranny is not only violence, it is taking so much that the taking becomes normal. Mankind censure injustice, fearing that they may be the victims of it. Plato is describing a very human sleepwalking. People condemn wrongdoing not because they love goodness, but because they fear pain, and fear is often louder than conscience. Imagine a crowd under a pale moon, faces half lit, murmuring about what is wrong. Not from clarity, but from vulnerability, because everyone is aware that the knife can turn in any direction. In a soothing interpretation, you can treat this as compassion rather than accusation. Most people are still learning, still tender, still protecting their own small lives. And the quiet invitation hidden inside the line is this: move from fear to understanding. From I hate injustice because it could hurt me, to I love justice because it heals the world. repeated in the simplest way, like a bedtime phrase. It is easy to hate what scares you, and harder, calmer, and deeper to love what is right. But the chief penalty is to be governed by someone worse. This is a sentence that walks slowly like a guard on the city wall at midnight, because it is not about punishment by courts, but punishment by consequence. Imagine a quiet citizen who refuses responsibility, who prefers to remain untouched. And then imagine the empty chair in the council hall, the chair that will not stay empty because life does not keep vacancies. Someone will sit there. Someone will steer the ship, and Plato suggests that if the capable avoid the work of rule entirely, the steering falls to hands that are clumsier, harsher, more selfish, and the whole vessel shudders. Let the image soften. A ship on dark water, stars scattered like silver dust, and a helmsman's hands either steady or careless, repeated gently as if rocking the thought back and forth. When good people step away, worse people step in. The just is always a loser in comparison with the unjust. This is the complaint that makes many hearts tired. The feeling that the world is a rigged game where the honest are slow and the dishonest are swift. And Plato does not ignore that feeling. He lets it speak. Picture two travelers on the same road, one carrying a lantern openly, one hiding a blade in his cloak. And notice how the second may gain shortcuts, favors, bargains, because fear and secrecy can be traded like currency. But in the quiet rhythm of sleep, we can widen the time horizon until it becomes serene. What looks like losing in a day may be not losing yourself over a lifetime, and what looks like winning may be a slow exchange of the soul for comfort. Say it again, softer, kinder. The unjust may win things, but the just keeps a certain kind of wholeness, release from bondage to a pack of raging tyrants. Sophocles speaks of desire as tyrants, and this is a tender bridge between politics and the inner life, because Plato wants you to notice that a city's tyranny often begins as a person's tyranny. Hunger ruling reason, impulse ruling peace. Imagine an old man sitting on a stone bench at twilight, the noise of the day fading, and for the first time in decades he can hear the wind in the olive trees without being dragged by craving. And he calls that quietness freedom. And you, listening now, can feel the same possibility, not to fight desire like an enemy, but to let it loosen, to let it relax its grip, until the mind becomes a smooth, dark lake reflecting a few steady stars, repeated in simpler words very gently. When desire calms down, a person becomes easier to live inside. Exceed the limit of necessity, and give themselves up to the unlimited accumulation of wealth. This is how the political becomes almost lullaby. Sad, Plato traces war not to monsters, but to more, to the quiet decision that enough is never enough. Imagine a simple table with bread and olives. Then imagine the table expanding silver plates, perfumes, rare meats, until the room itself feels crowded, until the body is overfed and the mind is restless. And soon the city needs more land, more labor, more control. The phrase limit of necessity is like a low stone wall in a field, humble and protective. An unlimited accumulation is like water that ignores banks and spills everywhere. Let your mind see a calm boundary, and then feel the peace of staying within it, because Plato is whispering that moderation is not deprivation. It is the art of not summoning storms repeated softly. When more becomes a habit, peace becomes expensive. The beginning in every task is the chief thing. This is a quiet rule that applies even to justice, and even to sleep. what you begin with, you tend to become. Imagine the first pale light on a Greek hillside, the moment when the dark blue sky begins to thin, and you can almost see the day being shaped from its first breath. Plato suggests that beginnings are powerful because they set a rhythm, like the first notes of a song that your heart continues to follow long after. If a city begins by praising strength alone, it will likely grow into strength without kindness. And if a person begins by telling themselves, "I must win," they will likely become a kind of private tyrant to their own general needs. Repeat it simply, like a bedtime instruction. Begin softly, and you will move softly. The first and chief injunction is careful guardians of the intermixture of these metals in the souls. This is the strange myth of gold and silver and iron inside the human being. And even if you do not take it literally, it carries a dreamlike truth. A city tries to sort people, label them, assign them, as if the soul were an alloy to be tested. Imagine a furnace glowing red in the dark, a smith lifting molten metal, watching it cool, deciding what it is fit to become, a plow, a sword, a crown. And then imagine that same measuring gaze turned toward children, toward futures not yet lived. Plato is not only describing control, he is showing how control can sound pious, careful, even for the good of the city, and how easily social order can become social hardness, said again softly, with warmth. When rulers believe they can weigh souls like metals, they may forget the tenderness that makes a soul human. If the guardians aren't what they seem, they'll utterly destroy the whole city. This is the calm warning at the center of the political dream. The most dangerous failure is not in the shoemaker's hands, but in the guardian's character, because when those who protect the law begin to use the law as a disguise, the entire structure becomes hollow. Imagine a tall temple at night, columns standing in perfect symmetry, and then imagine that the stone inside the columns has begun to crumble. Outside it still looks strong, inside it is dust. Plato is teaching you to care about the invisible part of leadership, the part that cannot be audited easily. Whether the guardian truly guards, whether the ruler truly serves, and in a quieter personal reading, it becomes advice for your own inner life too. If the part of you that guards your choices is asleep or corrupt, the whole day can collapse into confusion, repeated gently. When the protectors lose integrity, everything becomes fragile. Wealth and poverty corrupt them and make them bad workmen. This is the soft sentence with a wide shadow. Too much and too little both distort the craft of living, because excess invites laziness and scarcity invites desperation. Picture a potter's wheel turning slowly, clay-centered, hands steady, and then imagine the potter either drowning in luxury, forgetting the feel of the clay, or starving, lacking tools, lacking time, lacking calm. Plato is pointing toward a middle condition that is not glamorous but is deeply sleep, friendly enough, steady enough, quiet enough, in the political sense. The line suggests that a city pulled too far toward wealth or too far toward poverty begins to lose skill, dignity, patience, and then it becomes easier for power to manipulate it. Because imbalance makes people easier to steer, repeated simply. Extremes bend people out of shape, and balance helps them stay whole. Democracy, a charming form of government full of variety and disorder. Listen to how gentle and almost amused this sounds, as if Plato is watching a lively marketplace. Colors, voices, perfumes, arguments, jokes, everything available, everything moving, and yet, underneath, a kind of drifting, Imagine a city square where every stall calls you, every path invites you, and you keep turning your head until you forget where you are going, because too many choices can become a soft kind of chaos. Plato's variety is soothing to picture, bright fabrics, different songs, many kinds of lives, but his disorder is the warning that without an inner compass, variety becomes dizziness, and for sleep, this becomes an inner practice. You can let the day's variety pass you by without grabbing it, and you can choose one quiet path back to yourself, repeated softly. Freedom is beautiful, and it needs calm direction to stay peaceful. Democracy passes into despotism. A short sentence, almost like a pebble dropped into a still pool, making circles that widen and widen, because Plato is describing a transformation that happens by degrees. The way night comes, no single moment announces it, and yet suddenly the sky is dark. Imagine a bright hall where everyone speaks at once. Then imagine, over time, the tired desire for one voice, one decision, one hand to settle the noise, and that hand slowly tightens into a fist. Plato is not saying that every free society must end this way. He is saying that the craving for simplicity can become the craving for domination, especially when fear is present. In a quieter, personal way, you can hear an echo. When the mind is chaotic, it sometimes longs for a harsh inner controller, and that harshness can become its own tyranny, repeated gently. When we fear disorder, we may invite something worse than disorder. The people have always some champion, the root from which a tyrant springs. Plato asks you to imagine the beginning of tyranny not as a monster arriving from outside, but as a protector rising from within the crowd, fed by gratitude, by need, by applause, by the simple human wish to feel safe. Picture a single figure in a public square at dusk, cloak moving in the wind, voice calm, promising to defend the weak, and the crowd leaning in, relieved, handing over trust like a warm loaf of bread. And then picture, much later, the same figure in a higher place, the air colder, the distance greater, surrounded by guards. And notice how easy it is for protection to become possession, for I will help you to become you belong to me. Now let the rhythm slow. Plato is teaching the listener to watch beginnings, to notice when admiration becomes dependency, when relief becomes surrender, repeated softly. Tyranny often begins as comfort. The tyrant is always stirring up some war or other. This is a quiet description of a loud tactic. Keep the people afraid, keep them needing a leader, keep them too occupied to look closely. Imagine a torchlit city at night, rumors moving like smoke through narrow streets, drums in the distance, speeches in the morning. Always another emergency, always another enemy. And now, very slowly, let that scene fade and replace it with a different image. A long one, a story told in shadow and light, because this is how Plato asks you to see power, not only with arguments, but with pictures. Imagine a cavern deep under the earth, cool stone, damp air, and in that cavern people have been sitting since childhood, chained so that they face a wall, and behind them a fire burns, and between the fire and the prisoners other people carry objects, small statues, tools, shapes of animals, so that shadows flicker across the wall, and the prisoners, having never seen anything else, call those shadows reality. They argue about them. They praise the one who predict. Which shadow will come next? They feel safe inside the pattern. And then imagine one person gently released, not violently, not with shouting, but slowly, as if waking, turning the neck with pain, seeing the fire, realizing that what looked real was only projection, walking upward through a rough passage, eyes aching, until finally there is open air and morning light, and the sky is wide, and the sun is quiet and blinding, and for a while the freed one cannot see, and then begins to see, and realizes how thin the old truth was. Now, bring this back to the tyrant who stirs war. War is like the fire in the cave, bright and frightening, keeping attention locked on shadows, keeping people from turning around because turning around is slow work, inward work, courageous work. And if the freed one returns to the cave to speak, his eyes accustomed to daylight will be awkward in the dark, and the others may laugh, and the laughter may harden into anger because to disturb a shadow world is to disturb people's sense of safety. Repeat the meaning in the simplest lullaby voice. Those who want to rule you may keep you staring at shadows, but you can still turn little by little toward a quieter light. And yon who breaks their laws is punished as a lawbreaker and a criminal. This line is simple and almost procedural, and precisely because of that it can be soothing to contemplate. The machinery of rule does not need to be emotional to be effective. It only needs to be consistent. Imagine a seal pressed into wax, a gate closing, footsteps of guards on stone. The calm finality of this is the rule. Plato's invitation is not to reject law, but to become wise about it, to remember that criminal is sometimes a moral fact, and sometimes merely a label applied by a system defending itself. And in the quiet of sleep, you can take what is useful here without becoming anxious. Let it be a reminder to choose your own inner law with care, so that you are not forever living only under outer labels. Repeated gently. A system can punish you for disobedience, but only you can decide what is truly right in your soul. If you're still here, breathing slowly, let the room stay dim and kind, and let these old ideas drift around you like slow-moving clouds, because the point is not to win an argument about justice tonight. It is to loosen the day's tight knots, and to fall asleep with a mind that sees more clearly, and therefore struggles less. Yearning for the pleasures of youth, sex and parties and drinking, let this be a distant murmur from an Athenian bench at dusk where old men sit beneath worn stone columns and speak about what they miss. And notice how desire can tell a story that sounds like truth. And I lived. Now I do not. Even when life is still, here, still breathing, still quietly offering itself. Imagine the pleasures as bright cups that once glittered in torchlight, and now, in memory, glitter even more, because memory polishes what it repeats, and the heart can grow thirsty for the shine rather than the drink. Plato lets us hear the complaint without mocking it, so we can recognize it in ourselves and release it, because release begins with recognition, and if the sentence feels heavy, repeat it in a kinder way. Sometimes the mind calls living only what excites it, but real living can also be calm, gentle, and slow. Old age frees you when your desires relax, release from bondage to raging tyrants. Picture a quiet room just before dawn, the air cool, the world still unclaimed by noise, and an old poet smiling as if he has finally loosened a tight knot that he once mistook for love. Plato's image is almost tender. Desire as tyrants, because a tyrant is not only cruel, a tyrant is noisy, demanding, impatient, forever insisting that now is not enough. And when he says old age can free you, you don't have to wait for years to taste the freedom. You can taste it tonight, in miniature, by letting one craving pass without obeying it, letting the body be a body, letting the mind be a sky. And to say it again in simpler words, softer and closer. When desire quiets down, peace steps forward, like morning light entering through linen curtains. Not age, but a man's character. If he's orderly and cheerful, imagine character as a small lamp you carry through changing seasons, through youth and age, through feast and famine. And notice how the lamp is not made of time. It is made of practice, of repeated choices, of what you feed and what you refuse to feed. Plato is telling you something soothing. The chaos you fear is not inevitable, and the calm you want is not an accident. It is a kind of inner order that can be cultivated like a garden behind a wall. See the garden now, dark soil, a few steady olive trees, a path of pale stones, and feel how orderly and cheerful is not a dramatic triumph. It is a steady temperature in the soul, repeated gently, as if you were reminding a tired friend. Peace is less about your age and more about your inner arrangement. Roast myrtle, berries and acorns. Drinking in moderation, live in peace and health. Let the scene become slow and edible in the imagination. A small fire crackling in a hearth. Hands passing simple food. The smell of herbs, the soft hush of family voices. And outside the doorway the sky is full of stars that do not hurry. Plato's moderation is not a moral scolding. It is a recipe for sleep. Because when the appetite is gently satisfied rather than violently indulged, the body stops arguing with itself, and the mind stops bargaining for just one more. Feel the difference between a cup that warms the throat and a cup that drags the mind into restlessness. And notice how moderation is a kind of respect for tomorrow. And if the idea feels too lofty, repeat it plainly. A little enough can be sweeter than too much because it lets you rest. Take care that their families do not exceed their means, having an eye to poverty or war. See a boundary line in the sand at the edge of a quiet shore, drawn not by fear but by wisdom, because Plato is tracing how more quietly becomes not enough, and how not enough quietly becomes conflict. Exceeding one's means is not only a financial act, it is a spiritual act. A decision to live above one's inner ground, like building a house too tall for its foundation, until the smallest wind makes it tremble. Imagine a city that knows its limits, not cramped, not ashamed, simply proportionate, like a temple whose columns are neither too thick nor too thin, and therefore stand without strain, said again in a softer, more personal way. When you keep your life within what truly supports you, you stop summoning storms you didn't want to fight. The true and healthy constitution, the simpler way of life. Let healthy mean what it means in the deepest sense, not merely the absence of sickness, but the presence of balance, the feeling that nothing inside you is screaming over the others. Plato's simpler way can be pictured as a clear spring in the hills, water so clean. You can see stones resting on the bottom, and you can almost hear the quiet logic of it. What is needed is met. What is not needed is allowed to pass. Simplicity here is not poverty. It is uncluttered attention. It is a room with space to breathe, a table with space to eat, a mind with space to sleep. And if your day has felt complicated, let the word simpler become a permission, like taking off a heavy cloak, repeated gently. The healthiest life is often the one with fewer extra weights. A state at fever heat, adding dainties and perfumes and cakes Now let Plato tell a long, slow story inside your mind. The story of a city that warms itself into illness the way a body gets a fever. First, the citizens eat plain bread and share quiet songs, and the streets are ordinary, and the night is dark enough to see constellations. Then one person says, "We should have more," and more arrives wearing pleasant faces, new tastes, new scents, new entertainments, until the city begins to need an army of helpers for its own indulgence, and the air becomes thick with appetite. And notice how fever is not evil. Fever is a sign of strain, a body trying to handle what it cannot digest. This is Plato's lullaby, warning luxury can be pleasant and still make a life restless, because it multiplies the number of things you must chase. Repeated in simpler words, when life gets overheated with more, the soul begins to sweat. Much greater need of physicians. See the connection as gently as you would watch smoke rising. When desires multiply, ailments multiply, not only in the body but in the spirit, because the more you demand from pleasure, the more fragile you become when pleasure is absent. Plato's line is quietly funny and quietly sad. More luxury, more doctors, because it suggests that the cure we seek in indulgence often plants the seed of the next discomfort. Imagine a bright banquet hall, overflowing plates, and then, later, the same people lying awake, stomach heavy, mind heavy, needing remedies, needing reassurance, needing someone to fix what excess has stirred. And for sleep, let the lesson be kind. You do not have to fix everything tonight. You only have to lower the fever by a degree, repeated softly. A simpler appetite often needs fewer cures. Exceed the limit of necessity. Unlimited accumulation of wealth. Picture necessity as a small, steady lamp on a windowsill, giving enough light to see the room, and unlimited accumulation as a blaze that consumes its own fuel, and still asks for more. Plato is showing you how desire becomes endless, not because the world is stingy, but because the appetite, once trained to chase excess, forgets how to stop, forgets the feeling of enough. And that forgetting is one of the most tiring kinds of hunger. Imagine hands scooping water into a cracked jar, always working, never satisfied, and feel how the labor itself becomes the punishment. Now let your breath slow and your jaw unclench, because this is not a judgment, it is a map, repeated gently. When you cross the line of enough, you may spend the rest of your life trying to find it again. And so we shall go to war. Plato says it almost like a sigh, as if war is not a thunderbolt from the gods, but a logical consequence of unquiet wanting. See it as a chain of images. A table that grows too lavish, a pantry that demands too much, fields that are suddenly not enough, neighbors who become obstacles rather than fellow humans, and the mind that cannot accept limits begins to accept violence. And you can make this tenderly personal too, because the war can be inside you. When one desire fights another, when the mind fights the body, when resentment fights gratitude, and all night becomes a battlefield. So let the line be a cue to disarm, to step back from the inner border disputes, to stop annexing more territory in your thoughts, repeated softly like a lullaby instruction. When more calms down, conflict calms down. War, derived from causes of almost all the evils. This is one of Plato's quietest and widest claims, and you can hold it like a smooth stone in your palm. The root of many evils is a kind of uncontrolled desire, a refusal to stay proportionate. Picture a tree at night. Branches, black against the star. Sand, imagine tracing the branches back to the trunk, and the trunk back to the roots, and in the roots you find a simple thirst, more land, more status, more pleasure, more certainty, and now feel how relief enters when you see the root, because what is seen can be softened. Let it become simple. When you keep your desires within what is real and kind, many troubles never grow at all. The beginning in every task is the chief thing. Think of beginning as the first note of a song that your body continues to hum without effort. If you begin your day with hurry, the whole day runs. And if you begin with grasping, the whole day grabs. And if you begin with gentleness, something inside you stays gentler even when the world is sharp. Imagine the pale first light over the Aegean, the sea almost still, and a fisherman pushing a boat out slowly, not because he is lazy, but because he is aligned with the rhythm of the water. Plato is giving you a tool for moderation. Start small, start true, start within limits, and the rest becomes easier. Repeated in a softer way. Meant for sleep, how you begin shapes how you rest. A fit of laughter, indulged to excess, produces a violent reaction. Even joy, Plato reminds us, has a rhythm, and when the rhythm is broken by excess, the body swings like a pendulum and must swing back. Imagine laughter echoing through a bright courtyard, too loud, too long until the chest aches and the face tightens. And then, afterward, a sudden flatness, a hush that feels almost like sadness. This is not to forbid laughter. It is to understand balance, because the soul, like a lyre string, plays sweetest when it is neither too taut nor too slack, and for sleep, the line becomes soothing permission to be moderate even with stimulation. Joy without frenzy, pleasure without chasing, repeated gently. When you keep the rhythm, you avoid the crash. Attention to health is a great obstacle. Picture a person standing under starlight, checking their pulse again and again, measuring the body as if the body were an enemy that might betray them. And notice how the obsession itself becomes the illness. Plato's sentence is not anti-health. It is anti-fear, because fear can disguise itself as care. And then care becomes a cage. Imagine a small bird in the hand. If you clutch too hard to protect it, you harm it. But if you hold it gently, it rests. In the quiet of this moment, let your own care become gentler, less controlling, more trusting, so that the body can do what bodies do: repair, soften, drift. Repeated in simpler words. Too much worry about living well can keep you from living well. Everything that deceives may be said to enchant. Enchantment is a beautiful word for a dangerous softness, because what enchants does not usually threaten. It invites, it glows, it sings. Imagine a lamp in a dark alley that makes the mist look golden, and you walk toward it without thinking, because the light feels like safety. Plato is telling you that many desires are like that. Sweet illusions, persuasive shadows, that promise rest and deliver restlessness, promise fullness and deliver hunger. And tonight you can practice a calm awakening, not a harsh one, simply noticing which lights are true and which are tricks. Repeat it gently, like a spell that breaks a spell. Not everything that shines is nourishment, wealth and poverty. If a potter gets rich, lazy and careless, let the potter's wheel turn in your mind, steady, circular, hypnotic, and see how craft requires a certain humble tension. Enough need to stay attentive, enough comfort to keep hands steady. Plato's image is tenderly practical. Too much wealth can make the hands forget their patience, and too much poverty can make the hands shake. And in either case the clay collapses. Translate this inwardly. When you are flooded with comfort, you may lose the sharpness that keeps you honest, and when you are starved of comfort, you may lose the calm that keeps you kind. Imagine the perfect middle. A small workshop, morning light, simple tools, and a mind that doesn't have to rush, repeated softly. Balance helps you do good work inside and out. Wealth produces luxury and laziness, poverty, crime and bad work. Hear how Plato describes extremes, not as glamorous identities, but as pressures that bend the soul. Luxury can soften you until you cannot bear small discomforts, and poverty can harden you until you cannot bear small delays, and both can make you restless in different ways, like winds from opposite directions that still disturb the sea. Picture two houses on a hill, one too full, overflowing with objects, each object asking to be protected, and one too empty, cold with lack, each day asking to be survived. And notice how neither house easily sleeps. The lesson is not to fear money, but to fear imbalance, because imbalance invites desperation, and desperation invites unwise desire. Repeated gently, extremes make the soul noisy, and enough makes it quiet. Guard the one big thing, or rather, sufficient. This is a word you can breathe with, sufficient, because it does not sparkle, it does not shout, it simply fits. Imagine a cloak that is warm enough, a room that is quiet enough, a meal that is filling enough, and feel how enough is not a number but a sensation of completion, the sensation that you do not need to chase the next thing to be allowed to rest. Plato's correction, not big but sufficient, is like smoothing a wrinkle in the mind, because so much exhaustion comes from confusing bigger with better and to repeat it in the simplest possible way. Very tenderly, you don't need the most, you need what is enough. Education and upbringing. Become moderate men. Picture moderation not as a strict fence, but as a lullaby learned early, a rhythm that enters the bones before the arguments begin, the way a child learns the tempo of walking beside a calm adult. Plato suggests that moderation is grown, not grabbed, and that a well-shaped life becomes quietly self-guiding, able to discern what matters without constant rules. Imagine a young person learning to tune a lyre, turning the pegs little by little, listening, adjusting, until harmony arrives, and notice how the best tuning is patient, not forceful. If you want to sleep, friendly summary, let it be this: a moderated life is a trained calm, and calm can be practiced. Look, ye wretches, take your fill of the fair sight. Now let me tell this as a slow night story, with shadows and dust and the steady pull of appetite. Leontius is walking outside the city walls, where the air is colder and the ground is rougher, and he sees bodies lying there, and something in him recoils, reason, dignity, the part that wants to be clean, and yet another part surges forward, with a dark curiosity, the hunger to look, to take in what is forbidden, as if seeing will satisfy an invisible itch. He argues with himself while his feet keep moving, and the argument is not loud, it is intimate. And then he suddenly rushes closer, and he speaks harshly to his own eyes, as if the eyes were unruly animals. And he says, "Take your fill." And in that moment Plato shows you the inner structure of desire, not merely wanting, but wanting against yourself. And if you recognize this, late night scrolling, late night snacking, late night reopening old wounds, be gentle, because recognition is already a loosening of the chain, repeated simply and kindly. Sometimes a part of you wants what another part of you does not, and you can learn slowly to let the quieter part lead. Merely a consumer of goods, a drone, a plague to the community. Imagine a hive at midday, sunlight on wax, the steady hum of work, and then a drone that eats and rests and never joins the shared labor. Not because it is evil, but because it has slipped into a life where pleasure is disconnected from purpose. Plato's image can feel sharp, but we can hold it gently tonight, because he is warning you about a kind of inner drifting. When desire becomes your only job, you lose the deeper sweetness that comes from meaning, and then even pleasure tastes thin. Picture a person surrounded by comforts, yet unable to sleep, because the soul still feels hungry for something it cannot purchase. Repeated softly, without blame. If you only consume, you may forget how to feel full. 3 classes of men: lovers of wisdom, lovers of honor, lovers of gain. Let these 3 loves be like 3 constellations in the night sky, each pulling the inner compass in a different direction. One toward clarity, one toward recognition, one toward possession. Plato is not asking you to hate any part of yourself. He is asking you to see what leads you, because whatever you most love becomes your ruler, and rulers shape the laws of the heart. Imagine the soul as a small city at night, some windows lit, some dark, and in the central square 3 voices speak. One quiet and steady, one proud and bright, one urgent and cowing. And your peace depends on which voice you follow, repeated in a simpler bedtime line. Notice what you love most, because it steers you. Like cattle, always looking downward, they feed, fatten, and fornicate. This is Plato at his most vivid, painting a life bent toward the ground, and you can see it clearly, heads down, tables full, eyes never lifting to the stars. But hear the deeper point beneath the harsh imagery. When a person lives only for bodily satisfactions, they lose access to pure and lasting pleasures. The quieter pleasures that do not leave you emptier afterward, like understanding, friendship, inner order, the clean relief of a mind not at war with itself. Picture 2 nights, one filled with frantic appetite, and one filled with calm, looking upward, outward, inward, until the heart feels spacious, and to repeat it gently without harshness. When you never lift your gaze, you forget there is a sky. The beginning in every task is the chief thing. Let this be the first slow bell of the night, because Plato is reminding you that the mind becomes what it repeatedly begins. The way a path becomes visible only because many feet have stepped there. Imagine the very first light of morning on the Aegean Sea, not yet sunrise, only a thin whitening on the horizon. And notice how the whole day is already leaning in the direction of that first change, quietly, inevitably, without noise. Education works like that. Not as a sudden revelation, but as a habit of beginnings. How you begin to speak, how you begin to listen, how you begin to desire, how you begin to desire, how you begin to calm yourself after stress. And tonight you can practice a small beginning by inhaling gently and exhaling a little longer, as if you are teaching your nervous system a new first step. Said again. Simpler and kinder, start softly, and the rest of you will learn softness. We would tell them that quarreling is unholy, and that never up to this time has there been any quarrel between citizens. Plato's education begins like a lullaby begins. By choosing the stories a child's heart will sleep inside, because the first myths we hear become the background weather of the soul. Imagine an ancient Greek home with pale stone walls, a small oil lamp, and an elder telling a story while the child's eyelids grow heavy. And notice how the story is not merely entertainment, but a seed of what will later feel normal, possible, natural. When Plato says to teach that quarreling is unholy, he is not naively denying conflict. He is building a deep inner preference for harmony, so that when conflict comes, as it always comes, the educated person feels it as a sickness, not as a sport. And if your own mind has been quarreling with itself today, let this line be a permission to stop, to unclench, to choose peace as the default, repeated gently. Teach yourself that inner fighting is not your home. God is not the author of all things, but of good only. Whether you take God here as a divine being, or simply as the highest name for meaning, Plato is offering a calming orientation for education. Do not train the soul to worship cruelty as fate. Do not teach the heart that darkness is sacred. Picture a night sky so deep it looks like ink, and within it the slow steadiness of constellations that do not argue. Do not panic. Do not rush. And feel how a child raised under that kind of cosmic steadiness might grow up less inclined to excuse harm as just how things are. Education, for Plato, is partly the refusal to sanctify what deforms us, and partly the quiet insistence that goodness is real enough to aim for. If this feels too lofty, let it become small and practical. When you teach the mind to look for good, it relaxes, because it is no longer bracing for meaninglessness. Said again, very softly, don't make darkness your teacher. The gods are not magicians who transform themselves. Neither do they deceive mankind in any way. Plato is trimming away a kind of spiritual anxiety, the fear that reality itself is a trick, because when a child believes the world is fundamentally deceptive, the child grows into an adult who can never fully rest. Imagine a theater where shadows leap across a wall, and behind the wall someone is changing masks quickly: wolf, hero, monster, saint, until the watcher's trust collapses, and every face becomes suspicious. Plato does not want the soul educated in suspicion as its primary posture, because suspicion keeps the heart awake in the wrong way, tense and scanning. Instead, he wants a deep background of honesty, so that discernment can exist without paranoia, like a lighthouse that turns slowly rather than a siren that screams, repeated gently. When you trust that goodness does not lie by nature, your mind can finally stop bracing. And we must beg Homer and the other poets not to be angry if we strike out these and similar passages. This is Plato being surprisingly tender with art while still being firm with its power. He knows that beautiful words enter the soul like perfume, quietly and completely, and that a child cannot always defend against a lovely lie. Picture a scroll unrolling under a columned portico, the letters dark and elegant, the rhythm of the poem almost like waves, and notice how easy it is to agree with a verse, simply because it sounds true. Plato's educational instinct is protective, not because he hates poetry, but because he respects it, because he understands that what is sung gets under the skin. And if you have spent a lifetime absorbing harsh stories, stories that glorify cruelty, stories that call numbness strength, then you can feel how radical it is to edit your inner library, gently removing what makes you restless. Repeat it simply. Choose your stories because your stories will choose your feelings. Truth should be highly valued if, as we were saying, a lie is useless to the gods and useful only as a medicine to men. Then the use of such medicines should be restricted to physicians. Private individuals have no business with them. Plato is drawing a line that feels like cool water on the forehead. Truth is not merely a rule. It is a climate in which the soul can breathe. Imagine a clear spring in the hills and compare it to a muddy puddle. Both are water, but only one invites you to drink without fear. When Plato calls lies medicine, he is acknowledging complexity without making deception casual, and he is warning that most people are not careful enough to lie without poisoning themselves, because lying disturbs the inner sense of orientation, like moving the stars in the sky and then asking the traveler to navigate for sleep. This matters more than it seems, because a mind that has to maintain falsehood cannot fully relax. It must keep watch, repeated gently. Tell the truth when you can, because truth lets the mind put down its armor. A fit of laughter, which has been indulged to excess, almost always produces a violent reaction. Plato is speaking here like someone who has watched the body's pendulum swing for years, noticing that even joy, when it becomes frantic, can tip into fatigue and irritability. The way a bright flame can consume the very oil that feeds it. Imagine a crowded courtyard, laughter ricocheting off stone, wine, splash, music speeding up, and then the sudden hush afterward, when the night feels too quiet and the heart feels oddly hollow, as if the soul has spent too much energy trying to stay high. Education, in this gentle sense, is learning the art of rhythm, how to let pleasure be warm instead of scorching, how to let happiness be steady instead of manic. And if you need a softer restatement for bedtime, even good things need boundaries, so they don't turn into their opposites. Beauty of style and harmony and grace and good rhythm depend on simplicity. I mean the true simplicity of a rightly and nobly ordered mind and character. This line can be listened to like music itself, because Plato is saying that beauty is not mainly decoration. It is a reflection of inner order. Picture a row of ancient kalu, men's at dawn, each one evenly spaced, each one holding the weight without strain, and feel how that visual calm is what simplicity looks like when it is noble rather than empty. In the same way, a mind that is not overstuffed with compulsions, not tangled in contradictions, begins to speak with clarity, to move with grace, to rest with ease. Plato is quietly teaching that your outer life, your voice, your relationships, your choices, takes on the rhythm of your inner arrangement. And if your inner life feels cluttered, you don't need to fix everything tonight. You only need to simplify one breath, one thought, one expectation repeated softly. When the mind is ordered, life becomes beautiful without trying. Musical training is a more potent instrument than any other, because rhythm and harmony find their way into the inward places of the soul. Here Plato offers one of his most sleep-friendly truths. The soul is educated not only by arguments but by rhythms, because rhythm bypasses the vigilant mind and enters the deep, are rooms where your habits live. Imagine a lyre being tuned in a quiet room, each string tightened a fraction, the sound becoming cleaner, and notice how the body responds before the intellect does. Shoulders dropping, jaw unclenching, breath lengthening, inward places is the key phrase, because it suggests that what you repeatedly hear and feel becomes your inner architecture, like a melody that continues even after the musician leaves. So tonight, as you listen, you can let your breathing become a kind of music. Inhale slowly, exhale slowly, again, teaching the nervous system a harmony it can remember. repeated in simpler words. Rhythm educates you from the inside out. Everything that deceives may be said to enchant. Plato is warning you that deception rarely arrives as a threat. It arrives as beauty, as sweetness, as an invitation that feels like relief, because enchantment is how the false gets consent. Imagine moonlight on water, so lovely that you forget how cold the sea can be, and you step forward, drawn by shimmer, not by reason. In the modern mind, enchantments can be endless, glossy images, perfect lives, quick fixes. The promise that one more scroll, one more purchase, one more approval will finally make you whole. And Plato's calm gift is simply naming the mechanism, because what is named becomes less magical. And you can practice de-enchantment gently, not by forcing yourself, but by pausing long enough to ask, does this soothe me, or does it keep me hungry? Repeated softly. Not every lovely thing is true, and you are allowed to choose what truly calms you. The judge should not be young. He should have learned to know evil, not from his own soul. Plato is describing a kind of mature discernment that does not come from being corrupted, but from observing clearly over time, like watching weather patterns until you can recognize a storm by the smell of the air. Imagine an older judge walking through a city at twilight, seeing quarrels, greed, tenderness, fear, not shocked by any of it, yet not seduced either because he has learned the shapes of things without needing to become them. This is education as patience. The ability to understand darkness without letting it move into your house, and for your own inner life. The line can become a bedtime instruction. Notice your impulses without becoming your impulses. See your shadows without letting them rule. Repeated gently. Wisdom doesn't need you to be ruined in order to recognize what ruins. Good education and upbringing, if preserved, will produce good natures. Plato is offering a faith that is quieter than optimism, that goodness can reproduce itself when it is protected. Like a small flame passed carefully from lamp to lamp, picture a line of candles in a dark temple, each flame leaning toward the next, sharing heat without losing itself, and feel how preserved matters, because education is fragile when it is neglected, mocked, or replaced with noise. Good natures here does not mean perfect people. It means people whose default direction is toward balance, toward fairness, toward the kind of inner order that makes sleep possible. And if you feel like your own upbringing was not preserved, or not gentle, you can still begin preserving yourself now by choosing what you rehearse in your mind. Repeated softly, what you protect inside you tends to grow. The direction in which education starts a man will determine his future life. Think of direction as a compass needle that settles in a quiet hand, because Plato is not saying you are trapped. He is saying momentum is real. Imagine a small stream at its source, barely more than a trickle between stones, and then imagine it miles later as a river, not because it decided dramatically to become a river, but because it kept flowing the same way. Education starts the flow, what you reward, what you repeat, what you call normal, what you call shame, what you call worthy. And tonight, even as an adult, you can give yourself a new start, direction with something as simple as a kinder internal voice, a slower breathing pattern, a gentler expectation, repeated in very plain words. Your habits steer you, so choose a habit that points toward peace. Bodily exercise, when compulsory, does no harm to the body, but knowledge which is acquired under compulsion obtains no hold on the mind. This is Plato's tender psychology. The body can endure force, but the mind closes under force because understanding cannot be bullied into existence. Imagine a child made to memorize under threat, eyes dull, heart withdrawing. And then imagine the same child discovering something through curiosity, eyes bright, attention naturally steady, because the mind opens when it feels safe. Plato is telling you why harshness often fails at the deepest levels, because fear can make behavior comply, but it cannot make the soul love what it learns. For sleep, this matters because many people try to force themselves into calm, stop thinking, stop worrying, and the mind resists. But if you invite calm gently, it comes, repeat it softly. Force can move the body, but only gentleness teaches the mind. Do not use compulsion, but let early education be a sort of amusement. You will then be better able to find out the natural bent. Plato's word, amusement, here is not shallow distraction. It is the lightness that makes learning breathe, the playfulness that allows the soul to reveal what it naturally loves. Imagine children running in a sunlit courtyard, learning rhythm through clapping games, learning ballads through dance, learning courage through play fights that end in laughter. And notice how the body learns without realizing it is being taught. Now let this become a meditation for you. Inhale as if you are curious. Exhale as if you are safe. Again, and let your own mind approach rest not as a duty but as a gentle game. What does it feel like to soften the forehead, to release the tongue, to loosen the shoulders? Repeated simply. When learning feels like play, the soul shows you its true shape. And first he will see the shadows best, next the reflections of men and other objects in the water. Now let Plato's education become a long night story, slow enough to carry you toward sleep. Imagine a cavern under the earth, cool stone breathing damp air, and in that cavern people sit from childhood, chained so that their necks face one wall, and behind them a fire burns, and between the fire and the chained people others carry objects, small statues, shapes of animals, tools, vessels, so that shadows flicker on the wall like a silent theater. The chained watchers, having never turned around, call the shadows truth. They argue about them. They admire the one who predicts which shadow comes next, and their whole education is the study of appearances. Then one person is gently unchained, not shoved, not shouted at, simply released. And the first lesson is pain, because turning the neck toward the fire hurts eyes accustomed to dimness. And the second lesson is embarrassment, because the freed one realizes he has been certain about I. Illusions. He climbs upward through a rough passage, scraping hands on stone, and the air changes. And at last he reaches the mouth of the cave where night opens into sky, and later morning opens into light. And at first he can only see shadows outside too, then reflections in water, then objects themselves, and only gradually the larger order of things. This is Plato's picture of education, not stuffing the mind with facts, but turning the whole soul toward what is more real, step by step, with patience. And if you want it in a softer bedtime sentence, education is the slow turning from shadows toward clearer seeing. Last of all, he will be able to see the sun. Let that final image be gentle rather than blinding, because in sleep we do not strain for the sun. We simply trust that it exists. Imagine the sun rising behind distant hills, not harsh, just steady, painting the tops of stone columns with pale gold. And notice how the world becomes visible without being forced, because light does not argue. It simply are. Rives, Plato is saying that the highest learning is not mere opinion, not mere reflection, but direct seeing, And direct seeing takes time because the eyes of the soul must adapt. And you can practice that adaptation tonight by not demanding sudden clarity from yourself, by letting your mind be dim if it is dim, by letting understanding come later. Repeat it softly. You don't have to stare at the sun right now. You only have to keep walking toward a truer light. The knowledge at which geometry aims is the knowledge of the eternal. Plato brings in geometry like a quiet teacher, bringing a student to the window. Look at what does not rot, what does not change with fashion, what does not depend on crowds, proportion, relation, the calm consistency of number and form. Imagine a circle drawn in sand, imperfect yet clearly a circle, and above it the night sky where stars trace arcs that repeat with patient fidelity, and feel how the mind can rest when it contemplates something steady, because so much anxiety comes from living only among the shifting. Eternal here is not a threat, it is a blanket. It is the suggestion that beneath the day's noise there is an order that does not panic, and if that feels abstract, let it become very simple. Think on something stable, and your mind becomes more stable too. Repeat it gently. The soul sleeps better when it remembers what doesn't hurry, until philosophers are kings. Imagine a city at dusk, the rooftops darkening, a few lamps trembling in doorways, and in the center a public square, where voices usually compete like waves colliding, each one insisting, each one hungry. Plato's strange hope is that the ones who have learned to love truth more than applause, and steadiness more than victory, might one day hold power, not like a clenched fist, but like a steady hand placed on a fevered forehead, because the philosopher king is not simply a clever ruler. He is an inner climate of restraint, the kind of mind that can look at desire without being kidnapped by it. Breathe in gently for a count of 4, and breathe out for a count of 6, and as you exhale, let the idea settle that wisdom is meant to calm life, not dominate it. Said more simply, more softly, Plato dreams of leadership that feels like quiet understanding, not like noise. Since philosophers are those who are capable of apprehending that which is eternal and unchanging, under a deep star-salted sky, where the constellations keep their patient shapes night after night, Plato draws a line between two ways of living, the mind that can rest its gaze on what does not flicker, truth, proportion, the good, and the mind that wanders amid multiplicities, chasing the next bright thing the way a moth circles a lamp. Feel how tired the wandering is because wandering has no home, and how soothing the eternal is because the eternal does not demand that you refresh, reload, recheck tonight. Let your breath be your small, eternal, something simple and returning. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, and notice how repetition, when it is gentle, becomes peace. In kinder words, if you keep turning toward what is steady, your mind learns to be steady too. The spirit of truthfulness, the hatred of falsehood and the love of truth, the true lover of knowledge, the striver after truth. Picture a young student in the half-light of early morning standing between tall Greek columns as the first sunlight finds the marble's edges. And imagine that education is not primarily the stocking of facts, but the cultivation of a certain taste, the way you cultivate a taste for clean water after you have known thirst. Plato is describing a soul that prefers what is real, even when what is real is less flattering, less sweet, less immediately comforting. And this preference becomes a kind of inner lantern that allows a person to walk without constantly stumbling over illusions. If your day has been filled with small lies, performances, masks, exaggerations, let your body feel what it is like to set them down, just for tonight, and breathe as if you are rinsing your mind with clarity, said simply. Love truth, because truth lets you relax your guard. He is like one who retires under the shelter of a wall in the storm. See it clearly. A storm of dust and sleet drives through the streets, people running in every direction, tempers sharp as wind, ambitions whipping like torn cloth, and the philosopher steps aside, not from cowardice, but from a deep refusal to be, made ugly by ugliness, choosing instead to shelter under a wall, to keep his inner life clean, to let the storm pass without letting it move into his bones, in a sleepful reading. This is not escapism. It is a lesson in boundaries, in the quiet strength of not reacting, because not every argument deserves your nervous system. Not every outrage deserves your heart's attention. Inhale and feel the wall behind you. Your bed, your room, the simple safety of this moment, and exhale as if you are letting the storm remain outside, said more gently. Sometimes the wisest thing is to stay sheltered and keep your soul unspoiled. None of the governments as they now exist is worthy of the philosophic nature. Plato looks at the world and notices how easily the finest minds can be bent, like a foreign seed planted in alien soil, losing its native taste, absorbing the roughness around it until it becomes almost unrecognizable. Imagine a delicate plant growing beside a road where carts pass and dust falls, leaves dulled by grit, and feel the sadness of it. Not that the plant is weak, but that the environment is harsh, and yet there is comfort in naming the mechanism, because if the world can warp a nature, then a wiser environment, friends, habits, music, silence, can also preserve it. Tonight you become your own environment, arranging the inner room, dim light, slower thoughts, fewer demands, more kindness and simple words. Your mind needs a good soil, and you can begin providing it now. Whether the guardian ought to be blind or keen of sight. Plato's question is almost childlike, and that is why it is powerful. Can someone truly guard a city or a life while unable to see what matters? Imagine a watchman on a cliff at night. If his eyes are closed, the lighthouse is useless. The shore is endangered, because protection requires perception. And now let the image move inward, because you are also a guardian of your attention, your values, your rest. And the question becomes tender. What are you not seeing because you are tired, because you are overwhelmed, because you are rushing? Take one slow inhale, and on the exhale, allow one honest noticing, even if it is small. I am weary. I need softness. I don't have to solve everything tonight, said simply. To protect your peace, you must see your own needs clearly. Fix their eyes on the absolute truth. Picture a painter working by dawn light, studying a model patiently, not guessing, not rushing, not painting from rumor, because the hand can only create what the eye has truly held. Plato says a ruler without a vivid pattern in the soul cannot establish what is beautiful, just, and good, because without a model, the mind copies whatever is loudest. And this is also how inner life works. If you don't have a quiet pattern to return to, your mood becomes ruled by whatever is nearest, notifications, memories, fears. Like a boat pushed by every wave tonight, practice fixing your eyes softly, not with strain, but with gentle repetition. Choose one steady image. Perhaps the calm star, or the pale line of the horizon before sunrise, and let your mind rest there, said gently. Keep a clear model in your heart, and you won't be pushed around so easily. Isn't anyone who holds a true opinion without understanding like a blind man on the right road? Imagine walking at night on a familiar path, knowing by habit where the stones are, yet unable to see the sky, unable to see the distance, unable to see what has changed. Plato is telling you that you can be right and still be fragile, because without understanding you cannot adapt, you cannot guide others, you cannot remain calm when the road bends. And this is a sleep lesson too. If you cling to opinions in the dark, the mind stays tense, guarding its positions. But if you seek understanding, the mind loosens, because understanding feels like light, and light reduces fear. Breathe in as if welcoming a little more light behind your forehead, and breathe out as if releasing the need to be right tonight. Said simply, understanding is what lets you walk without gripping the air. The good is beyond reality, superior to it in dignity and power. Let this be a deep, slow thought, like a bell heard from very far away. Plato says there is a good that is not merely one more object among objects, but the source of intelligibility itself, the reason things can be known. The way the sun is not one more visible thing, but what makes visibility possible. Imagine sunrise over the sea, the water still dark, and then a widening path of light across the surface. And in that light everything becomes outline and color, then detail until even the smallest pebble is visible. The good is like that for the soul, and you do not need to grasp it tonight. You only need to rest under its suggestion, the suggestion that meaning is not invented by your worry. It is larger than your worry, said more softly. There is a light behind life, and you can stop straining for a moment and simply let it be there. And at first you would discern the shadows, then reflections, then the things themselves, looking at the light of the stars and the moon. Return gently to the long image of ascent, but let it feel like a dream you are safe inside. First shadows, then reflections in water, then objects in their own place, and later the sky itself, the moon's calm. Lamp, the stars like scattered seeds of silver. Plato is describing the way truth arrives in layers, not all at once, because the soul's eyes need time to adjust. And this is why harshness fails. Harshness tries to rip the eyes open before they are ready. If you have been impatient with yourself, why don't I understand? Why don't I change? Why don't I heal faster? Let Plato's ladder of seeing soothe you, because the slow unfolding is not failure. It is the natural pace of real transformation. Said simply, you are allowed to learn by degrees, the way night becomes morning. He would be able to look upon the sun itself and see its true nature, in and by itself in its own place. Imagine the moment of direct seeing, not through water, not through rumor, not through another person's excitement, but the thing itself steady and unborrowed, and feel how quiet that kind of seeing is, because it does not need to persuade, it does not need to defend. It simply knows. Plato's sun is also a lesson in inner honesty. To see a feeling in its own place is to admit it without dramatizing it. Sadness is sadness, fatigue is fatigue, longing is longing, so the emotion stops thrashing for recognition. Try it now with one soft label on the exhale, just one, tired, or safe, or letting go, and notice how the mind relaxes when it stops fighting what is. Said simply, when you see things clearly, they become easier to live with. The knowledge at which geometry aims is the knowledge of the eternal. Picture a simple triangle scratched into sand, imperfect, yet pointing beyond itself to something unchanging. The idea of triangle, the calm relation of angles, the quiet fact that proportion does not care about applause. Plato brings geometry into the Republic like a cool stream brought into a warm room, because contemplation of the eternal steadies the soul, and a steadied soul is less easily bribed by fleeting pleasures or frightened by fleeting threats. Tonight, you don't need to do mathematics. You only need to borrow the mood of it. Let your mind rest on something that doesn't hurry, like the slow rotation of the stars, like the ocean's patience, like your own breath returning again and again, said gently. When you remember the eternal, the urgent loses some of its sharpness. Each one spends his time in philosophy, and when his turn comes, he drudges in politics for the city's sake, and to go off to the isles of the blessed. This is Plato's quiet portrait of duty without glamour. The wise do not rule because ruling is delicious. They rule because it is necessary, like tending a fire so the household does not freeze, and then they return to contemplation, to what they actually love. Imagine a person walking at night along the city wall, not seeking praise, simply making sure the gate is latched, the torches are lit, and then, when the work is done, stepping away from noise into a garden where the air smells of herbs and the sky is open, and the mind can finally widen. Isles of the Blessed is the dream, image of rest after service, and you can borrow it tonight as a permission. You have done what you could today. Now you may go to your own small island. This bed, this darkness, this quiet, said simply, do what is needed, then let yourself rest. Perhaps there is a pattern set up in the heavens to found one in himself. Imagine looking up at the night sky from a silent hillside, the Milky Way like pale dust across black velvet, and feeling without words that there is an order you did not invent, an order that can be contemplated until it becomes an inner architecture. Plato's most tender political twist is here. Even if the perfect city never exists on earth, you can still found it within, arranging your soul the way a careful builder arranges stones, reason as a steady pillar, courage as a supporting arch, desire as a well-tended garden rather than a wildfire. Inhale as if you are looking up, exhale as if you are building inwardly, and let the exhale be long, as if placing one stone gently on another, said simply. You can live by a higher pattern, even privately, even quietly. No human thing is of serious importance. This line can feel cold if read quickly, but in the slow rhythm of night it becomes a blanket, because Plato is not telling you to despise human life. He is telling you not to be crushed by it, not to let every small drama pretend it is the whole cosmos. Imagine your worries as tiny lanterns scattered across a vast plain, each lantern bright up close, yet from the height of the stars they are only small points of light, not meaningless, but not absolute. Take a breath and feel scale return. Feel the shoulders loosen as if they've remembered the sky is bigger than a single conversation, a single mistake, a single fear, said softly, and more kindly, your problems are real. But they are not the whole universe, and you are allowed to rest. Allow the honeyed muse to enter, not law, but pleasure and pain will be the rulers. Picture honey shining in lamplight, sweet, thick, persuasive, and notice how sweetness can govern without force, simply by making you crave the next taste. Plato's warning is that art, Story and imitation can train the soul to obey. Pleasure and pain like kings chasing highs, fleeing lows, until reason becomes a servant, and the inner city becomes noisy and reactive. In modern life, the honeyed muse can be the endless feed, the dramatic headlines, the intoxicating fantasy that keeps you stimulated and therefore sleepless. Tonight, you can practice a gentler rule by choosing quieter imagery columns at dawn, the moon over still water, the soft darkness behind closed eyes, and letting pleasure be mild, letting pain be acknowledged but not enthroned. Said simply, sweetness is lovely, but don't let it drive your whole soul. We are very conscious of her charms, but we may not on that account betray the truth. This is Plato speaking almost like a careful friend, admitting that beauty has power, that charm is real, that we are moved by what moves us, and yet insisting that the deepest loyalty must be to truth, because without truth, the soul slowly loses its way, like a ship guided by singing rather than stars. Imagine a theater at night, actors speaking beautifully, the crowd breathing together, and then stepping outside afterward into the cold air where the real sky waits, quiet and unswayable. Plato is teaching you a calm discernment. You can love beauty and still ask what it is doing to your mind, whether it steadies you or stirs you, whether it clarifies you or enchants you. Breathe in as if receiving beauty. Breathe out as if releasing illusion. Said simply, enjoy what is charming, but keep your inner compass true. Virtue owns no master. The responsibility lies with the chooser. Heaven is guiltless. Now let the night open into Plato's final dream, the myth of Er, and let it unfold slowly as if you are watching it from a distance that feels safe. A warrior dies and returns with a report, not of flames and punishment alone, but of a vast meadow where souls gather light and tired, carrying the weight of choices they have made. And there are paths upward and downward, and judges and time, and a strange cosmic fairness that is not hurried. Then the souls are brought before a great turning spindle, the spindle of necessity, with its whorls and singing sirens, and each soul must choose a new life, not forced, not assigned, but chosen. And some choose badly from hunger or pride, and some choose wisely from experience. And Plato's point is tender and severe at once. You are not merely a victim of fate. You are a chooser, and the weight of choosing is also the dignity of being human. If this feels heavy, let the line soothe you. Heaven is guiltless, meaning the cosmos is not playing a cruel joke. The responsibility is yours, and therefore the possibility of goodness is also yours. Said more softly, you can't blame the sky, but you can choose your way gently, one choice at a time. Hold fast ever to the heavenly way. Follow after justice and virtue always, considering that the soul is immortal. Let this be the final slow lantern you carry towards sleep. The thought that the soul is larger than tonight's mood, larger than the day's failures, capable of enduring every sort of evil, and still returning. To what is worthy, imagine a narrow path on a hillside under stars, the wind quiet, the grass dark, and far ahead a faint line of morning light, and you walking without hurry because you are not racing death. You are practicing life. Now begin to let the body sleep. Unclench the forehead, let the tongue rest. Let the jaw soften. Let the shoulders drop. Inhale gently. Exhale longer. And with each exhale, repeat in the simplest words, as if rocking a child, follow what is good, and you will be all right. Follow what is good, and you will be all right. And now you don't need to listen for meaning anymore. You can let meaning dissolve into atmosphere, like starlight dissolving into dawn. So take 3 slow breaths. Inhale. Exhale, inhale. Exhale, exhale, inhale. Exhale, and with each exhale, feel the bed holding you more completely. Feel your thoughts becoming fewer and farther apart. And if a thought arrives, let it pass like a quiet boat crossing a dark lake. And if you want a gentle countdown into sleep, begin at 10 on the next exhale and drift down. 10, 9, 8. Until numbers become unnecessary. Until even the wish to sleep becomes soft and sleep, unforced, simply comes